So the iPad Air 2020 is finally available for customers to pick up, but the question is it worth buying if you're in the market for an iPad or a tablet? And in this video we're going to try and address that and give you a couple of things to consider if you're in the market for a new iPad or a new tablet in general. So what's new about the iPad Air 2020? And the first thing that stands out is the brand new design / old recycled design. So previously we've had, I guess, a more traditional iPad experience when it comes to the iPad Air. But this year round they've replicated the design language that's been used in the iPad Pros. Now the iPad Air 2020 looks pretty much identical to the iPad Pro 11-inch. The design and the squared off edges is all there, same sort of speaker setup as well. The major difference in terms of the design is it has a 10.9-inch display rather than an 11-inch display, so ever so slightly larger bezels. It also doesn't support Face ID as well, so if you're used to that on the iPad Pros, that is something you'll be missing out on. But instead, the iPad Air has Touch ID, which is built into the power button. So that is a really welcome addition in this day and age of masks, although kind of feels a bit lost on an iPad since you're probably going to be using it at home or somewhere where you're not wearing a mask, but fingers crossed that trickles down to the iPhones in future. So apart from the design change, or what's new in the iPad Air 2020? Now, it was one of the first devices to get Apple's upgraded A14 processor, which was a bit of a surprise to a lot of people because normally it's the iPhones that get that first and they're the ones that really celebrate the new chips and everything. But look, this year we've got it in the iPad Air. And what that means is it's one of Apple's fastest chips and it's one of the latest chips on the market. And that means the performance absolutely blows it away. The iPad Air is capable of some pretty fantastic things and it's going to be a very, very future-proof device. So massive step up in the performance there, and one that kind of rivals the iPad Pros. A lot of the other upgrades in the iPad Air, if you're coming from a previous generation of Air, is the fact that it takes a lot of stuff from an iPad Pro. So it's a lot of magnets, a lot of magnets, and that's great because it means it supports the new generation of the Apple Pencil, which basically just clips on as a little magnet there, and that will then start to charge the device. And it's just so handy. It also means it supports other types of accessories. So for example, the case that I'm using here uses a magnet to clip onto the back. But along with the magnets, you've also got the smart connector on the back there. So if you're in the market for something like Apple's Magic Keyboard, guess what? That's going to work with this device as well, which is a massive bonus. If you're somebody who's doing quite a lot of typing on the go, then instead of having to fork out for an iPad Pro, you can now get the iPad Air 2020, which will support that Magic Keyboard with mouse, trackpad. It's, you know what, it's a pretty appealing offer. One of the other changes that Apple have made with the iPad Airs is they now have the stereo speaker setup as well. So unlike the iPad Pro, which has the quad speaker, it doesn't really have the dual speakers, but they are on either side of the device, which makes any media consumption or any music or anything like that you're doing with this device so much more immersive and so much better quality. So it's an overall massive upgrade when it comes from the previous generation of iPad Air to the iPad Air 2020. But there are definitely a few things that you need to consider. And I'm going to cover those now just to kind of give you a better idea of some things to be considering if you are looking at either upgrading or just buying this device. Now, the first thing is it doesn't support Apple's ProMotion display. For those of you who aren't too sure what that is, it basically means it's got 120 Hz baked into the Pro. And that means it is buttery smooth for certain things. So for scrolling through web pages, for gaming, but most importantly, the Apple Pencil. If you're somebody who does a lot of note-taking and drawing, then the additional refresh rate of the display on the iPad Pro is massively handy because it emulates writing on this thing as if you were actually writing on a piece of paper. It is just so smooth. With the iPad Air 2020, it only has a 60 Hz refresh display, and that's not bad at all. But it does mean that it's slightly noticeable when you're jotting down notes or anything like that. Now for me, I didn't see it massively when it came to note-taking, but if you're somebody who's eagle-eyed and just really tuned into those sort of things, it might be something that affects your experience, so it's worthwhile considering. Also, if you do a lot of gaming on these devices and you just enjoy having that buttery smooth experience, it's one of those things that will have that ever so slight impact, especially when it comes to gaming. Until you see that 120 Hz display, it's kind of hard to describe it. But now, after using that on my iPad Pro, seeing a 60 Hz display does sometimes become a little bit jarring in the animations and the way you interact with the user interface. If you've never used it before, it's probably not going to be something that you'll notice, so you can kind of just disregard that. But it is something worthwhile bearing in mind. The other thing to consider if you're thinking about upgrading to the iPad Air is how much you're actually going to use it. So are you just going to be using it for a little bit of media consumption, web browsing and stuff like that? Because if you are, Apple have the standard iPad, which might be worthwhile considering. They've done some massive things with that. upgraded the screen size, upgraded the performance, and it comes in at a much lower cost. So that's one to consider. If you're going to be doing a lot of work on it, then maybe the iPad Pro is going to be the one worthwhile going for. The iPad Air sits in that middle ground, but quite close to cost in terms of the iPad Pros. But there are some cost savings there for you. So they're just a couple of things to consider. If you are in the market for something that's going to be really powerful and last a long time, then yes, the iPad Pro is a nice device to go for. But realistically, the feature difference between those two devices isn't massive enough, in my opinion, for the additional cost that you'd have to pay to get your hands on an iPad Pro. Like I said, if you're somebody who is going to be doing a lot of note-taking, gaming, stuff that's going to take advantage of that ProMotion display, then maybe the iPad Pro is for you. If not, the iPad Air is probably the one to go for instead. You can save yourself a little bit of money and pick up something like the Apple Pencil with that, or Apple's Magic Keyboard, or just a third-party keyboard or something else. Or just pocket the cash and spend it on something else that you want to get. When I talked to Liam about the iPad Air, we both agreed that it's probably the one to go for at the moment. Unless you need something that's got a much larger display, or the faster refresh, then the iPad Air fits the bill for pretty much everything you could need on a tablet. It's got great speakers, it's got a great looking screen, and it's got the new design as well. The chip inside of it means it's going to be future-proof and it's going to last for a very long time. It's running the flagship technology, so you don't need to worry about it becoming outdated. It has an ever so slightly smaller screen than the iPad Pro 11-inch, but that's not going to make a massive difference. And it has all the connection technology on there for the smart connector and other Apple accessories to be compatible with it, that again, you're not losing out on a massive amount. It's a decent price for the performance that you're going to get, and it will outclass pretty much any other tablet on the market. So yeah, in our opinion, the iPad Air is probably the one to go for at the moment. So let us know your thoughts. Are you in the market for a new iPad? And is the iPad Air 2020 on your radar at the moment? So let us know in the comments. If you already have one, then let us know what your thoughts are and how you're finding it. We're going to do our best again to try and get our hands on one so we can do a review on it and let you know our thoughts when we deep dive into that. In the meantime, hit that like and subscribe button and we'll be back in the future with some more videos for you. Stay safe and we'll see you soon. Ta-ra!